Toppling of the statue of Edward Colston in Bristol has brought into sharp focus the role played by Bristol and other ports in the Atlantic slave trade. I would like to bring to mind someone whose position in that slave trade was ambiguous. Alexander Falconbridge had been a surgeon on a slave ship. He then saw the light and became a prominent abolitionist, and it was involved in the setting up of a colony for freed slaves. It raises the question of how we should consider him in the overall picture. Hero or villain? Falconbridge had been born in Bristol in about 1760. His baptism record doesn't survive, so we don't know exactly when. He had then spent a year at Bristol Infirmary as a pupil, which enabled him to become a doctor, a surgeon. However, he was too poor to set up in practice on his own, so he took a position as a surgeon on board a slave ship. Potentially, this was lucrative because a surgeon on such a ship would receive, in addition to a salary, 1 shilling a head per slave landed alive. Some surgeons even became ship's captains. Between 1780 and 1787, Falconbridge was surgeon on 4 ships, which sailed along the west coast of Africa, chiefly in the Niger Delta, and then took the slaves to the Caribbean. The captain on his first 2 voyages, he later described as one of the best in the slave trade. But he was sickened by conditions on a later ship under Captain MacTaggart. And in 1787, in disgust, he went back to working as a pupil, apprenticed to a Bristol doctor. Falconbridge was later to write an account, or at least to have ghostwritten for him, an account of his time at sea. And he was sickened by what he saw. Very sickened. He said, "It is not in the power of the human imagination to picture to itself a situation more dreadful or disgusting." He still found the words to describe what he'd witnessed on his visits below deck to see his slave charges. The deck was covered with blood and mucus, and approached nearer to the resemblance of a slaughterhouse than anything I can compare to. The stench and foul air were likewise intolerable. Now, Falconbridge also recorded that air conditions for the crew were just as bad. They suffered from the unwholesomeness of the climate, the inconveniences of the voyage, the brutal severity of the commanders, and from other causes, Their conditions fall very little short, nor prove in proportion to the numbers less destructive to the sailors than the Negroes. It was not a happy picture for everybody. Well, back on land as a civilian doctor, Falconbridge was interviewed by Thomas Clarkson, one of the founders of the movement for the abolition of the slave trade. Clarkson visited Bristol to collect evidence, and Falconbridge was one of the few he talked to. He was ready to testify to the horrors of that slave trade. He became so passionate about abolition that he accompanied Clarkson to Liverpool in quest of more information. And at this time, described by Clarkson as an athletic and resolute-looking man, Falconbridge acted as the more slightly built Clarkson's minder. Tough man, he was able to act as a bodyguard to Clarkson. And Clarkson found some tough times gathering evidence in the docks of Liverpool and was pleased to have Falconbridge with him. Falconbridge then went on to report and give evidence to the Privy Council and to a committee set up by the House of Commons, where he was grilled mercilessly for about 4 days. He was asked to write down his experiences, and with the help of Richard Phillips as a ghostwriter, he wrote a pamphlet published in 1790 as an account of the slave trade on the coast of Africa. This was important as one of the first pieces of abolitionist literature and propaganda. Falconbridge, never the most commercially minded of men, sold the copyright to the Abolition Committee, which printed some 6,000 copies. With the proceeds, Falconbridge then set up as a doctor with a practice at Lodway near Bristol. And on the 16th of October 1788, he married the 19-year-old Anna Maria Horwood. It was not to be the happiest of marriages. Falconbridge's connection with the abolitionist movement, though, didn't end there. In 1790, Thomas Clarkson recruited him to go out to Sierra Leone, as it was to become, on behalf of the St. George's Bay Company, later the Sierra Leone Company. This company was an amalgamation of commercial profit-seeking with abolitionist philanthropy, and it aimed to found a colony of free black settlers. It had established a colony initially in 1787, but after a quarrel with their Temne neighbours, the colony had collapsed. Falconbridge's wife, Anna Maria, went with him and was to describe her experiences in her Narrative of Two Voyages, published in 1794. The first account by a woman of journeys to West Africa. It is now seen in some quarters as a classic of feminist literature. Yet, Anna Maria Falconbridge was actually pro-slavery. Well, very much a passionate man and a firm abolitionist, Falconbridge soon quarrelled with the local slave traders, but he did manage to bring the dispersed settlers together again and to persuade Chief Barner, the local Temne ruler, to allow the colony to be set up again. He and his wife then returned home, narrowly escaping shipwreck. But very soon, Falconbridge was sent out to West Africa again. Henry Thornton, a London banker and chairman of the Sierra Leone Company, realised that Falconbridge's knowledge of West Africa was indispensable to the project of setting up the colony. And Falconbridge was appointed as commercial agent with a salary of £300 a year, even though he had absolutely no commercial experience or nous. Falconbridge, tempted by the money, accepted and returned to West Africa, where he founded a settlement now known as Freetown. But the settlement was in disarray. Everything was confused until the arrival of Thomas Clarkson's 24-year-old brother, John, a naval lieutenant. In 1792, he arrived in the nascent colony with over 1,000 black American loyalist settlers and was to be appointed governor. The colony did not thrive at first. Many settlers fell ill. Mortality was high. Now, Falconbridge was supposed to be involved in the commercial development of the new colony, but he had no experience and he made no attempts to set up trading links with the neighbouring population. Instead, he returned to his roots as a doctor. Now, he did consider that there were problems with the settlement. He called it a premature, harebrained and ill-digested scheme of bringing such a large number of settlers into the largely untamed and disease-ridden wilderness before they were certain of possessing an acre of land. He was hasty-tempered and hard drinking, and would have been much more suited to keeping the former slaves healthy than to developing the profitability of the colony. As epidemic spread, he returned to his love of medicine and devoted his efforts to the care of the colonists. By this stage, he was drinking heavily. Indeed, he had done on the voyage out from Tenerife. And in that Spanish colony, it was noticed that he was noisy and publicly drunk. That perhaps the Sierra Leone Company might have forgiven had Falconbridge not been so unsuccessful in commercial dealings. A new commercial agent was sent out to replace him. And a few days after his arrival, Falconbridge drank himself into an early grave, dying on the 19th of December 1792 in Freetown. He was only 32. His had been an eventful, rough, tough, and hard-drinking life. By this stage, his wife hated him, and she almost rejoiced at her husband's death. Meanwhile, Henry Thornton of the Sierra Leone Company singled Falconbridge out as a scapegoat and blamed him for the early misfortunes of the infant colony. Clarkson too was seen as dispensable and was dismissed as governor. This was partly because he appeared to be placing his obligations to the settlers above the commercial needs of the company, just as Falconbridge had placed the health and medical needs of the settlers above profit. Anna Maria remarried within 2 weeks of her husband's death, declaring that she hated him. She married a slave owner, Isaac Dubois, an American loyalist and slave owner who would come out to the new colony. And her hatred of her husband, together with the need for the Sierra Leone Company to find a scapegoat, meant that Falconbridge's contribution to the campaign against the slave trade was ignored. His role, admittedly, was ambiguous. And he was not the easiest of men, by all accounts. But his career is a fascinating one. And he was a courageous pioneer in the campaign to rid Britain and the world of the ignominious slave trade. It is his legacy and contribution that we should remember. Saint or sinner? Well, that is for each of us to decide. Falconbridge himself probably wouldn't have wanted a statue. And also, that's not the time for such a statue to be put up, if there ever is a good time for something like that. It would make a good subject for film. After all, how many of us can pack so much into a life of only 32 years?